You're listening to the Mad Fictional Imagination Playhouse audio presentation of Happy Valley Reapers by Ryan Scorpio Reese.
Chapter 7. Shadows of the Past. Mrs. Gable seemed as unchanging as the venerable building that housed her books. Though dismissive of their now daily visitations, she was the Reapers' best hope for understanding the darker corners of Happy Valley's history. She stood before them now, smelling of aged paper and ink, mixed with floral perfume, her wiry frame wrapped in a cardigan as weathered as her library's oldest volumes. The Reapers huddled together like restless crows, watching her with nervous anticipation. "You believe the Vesperwaite family is behind this rash of disappearances?" Mrs. Gable asked, her voice flat with skepticism. Her gaze swept over their faces, lingering until each of them squirmed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "We're not saying we know everything," Trigby replied, pushing his glasses higher up the bridge of his nose, "but we've pieced together enough to know there's something off about them. Their history, the symbols, the ley lines." Mrs. Gable cut him off with a wave of her hand. "The ley lines," she muttered, her eyes narrowing. "There are things you don't know about those." "That's why we need your help," Juju said, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who had spent more time convincing adults than being heard by them. "You've been here longer than any of us. You know things no one else does. And the records are incomplete," Mrs. Gable finished, her tone clipped. "What's in the archives downtown is only part of the story. The rest has been deliberately kept out of reach." Her words hung in the air, thick with implication. Moz frowned. "Kept out of reach by who?" Mrs. Gable hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then, as if resigning herself to the inevitable, she turned toward the far end of the library. "Follow me." The Reapers exchanged glances, a mixture of excitement and trepidation, before falling into step behind her. She led them to a narrow staircase tucked behind an unmarked door. The wooden steps creaked under their weight as they descended into the library's basement. The space below was a stark contrast to the well-kept order above. Dust motes floated in the dim light of a single overhead bulb, and the air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of mildew. Against the back wall stood an ancient filing cabinet, its drawers reinforced with heavy locks. Next to it was a long table covered in a chaotic spread of yellowed documents, faded maps, and books whose spines were cracked from years of use. "This is where the real history of Happy Valley is kept," Mrs. Gable said, gesturing toward the table. "The parts they don't want you to know, and the parts no one else remembers." Trigby's eyes widened as he stepped closer to the maps. These are ley line charts," he whispered, tracing the faint lines with his finger. "But these are more detailed than anything I've found." "They should be," Mrs. Gable replied. "These were drawn by the town's original surveyors, Vesperwaite surveyors. They didn't just settle here by chance, they built the town to harness the lines." The Reapers crowded around the table as Mrs. Gable pulled a thick leather-bound book from the cabinet and laid it down with a heavy thud. Its cover was embossed with a symbol they recognized immediately, the same one they had found at the creek. "This is the Vesperwaite family ledger," Mrs. Gable said. "It's been passed down through their generations, documenting every transaction they've made with the ley lines." "Transactions?" Punky asked, her voice unusually soft. Mrs. Gable opened the ledger, revealing page after page of dense handwritten text, interspersed with strange symbols and diagrams. "Sacrifices," she said simply. "They've been feeding the ley lines for centuries, keeping the energy balanced in their favor. But every bargain comes with a cost." The room fell silent as the Reapers absorbed her words. "So the disappearances," Moz said, his voice heavy with realization. "They weren't random." "No," Mrs. Gable said, "they were calculated." Juju flipped through the ledger, stopping at a page marked with a faded red ribbon. Her eyes scanned the text and she froze. "This entry," she said, her voice trembling. "It mentions the creek, and the date matches when the symbol showed up. Squirt, who had been unusually quiet, pointed to another page. "Look," he said. "There's a list of names." Mrs. Gable leaned over, her expression grim. "Those are the ones they took." The Reapers exchanged uneasy glances. They had stumbled into something far darker than they had anticipated. "You said the ley lines are out of balance," Trigby said, his analytical mind already searching for solutions. "Is there a way to stop it?" Mrs. Gable hesitated again, her gaze flickering toward the ledger. "There might be," she said slowly, "but it would mean going against the Vesperwaites directly, and no one's ever come out of that unscathed." Punky set her jaw. "We didn't come this far to back down now." Mrs. Gable studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're brave. Maybe foolishly so. But if you're going to fight this, you'll need more than bravery. You'll need to understand what you're up against." She turned back to the table, pulling out another map marked with strange symbols and annotations. "This," she said, "is where we start." The Reapers leaned in, their determination solidifying. They had ventured into the shadows of Happy Valley's past, and now, with Mrs. Gable as their reluctant guide, they were ready to confront the darkness head-on. Or so they thought.
You've been listening to the Mad Fictional Imagination Playhouse audio presentation of Happy Valley Reapers by Ryan Scorpio Reese. If you've enjoyed yourself, consider hitting like and subscribe, and ring the notification bell to be alerted to new video and audio content when they drop. Also, if you would be so kind as to leave us a comment, we would greatly appreciate it. We need to let the algorithm know that this channel exists. Thanks for listening. Ciao, till next now.